The story begins with Elisa Mora, a young theater student whose fascination with abandoned places and cursed legends makes her an outsider among her peers. Elisa's curiosity often leads her into the darkest corners of her small town, searching for hidden stories and forgotten truths. It was during one of her late-night research sessions in the dusty archives of the local library that she stumbled upon the legend of the Cassandra Theater, a place infamous for its mysterious history. Known as the Theater of Lost Faces, it had been abandoned for over a century after a catastrophic fire during its final performance. The fire killed dozens, including the actors, but rumors whispered that no bodies were ever recovered. Only masks, each one seemingly untouched by the flames. The theater itself is described as a hulking structure of rotting wood and crumbling stone, hidden behind a dense thicket of ivy and shadowy trees. Local children dare each other to approach its gates, but none have ever entered. Stories circulate of strange noises, whispers, faint applause, and the haunting sound of a violin that plays when the moon is full. For Elisa, these tales are irresistible. Her heart races as she reads about the reopening of the theater for a one-night-only performance. The invitation is shrouded in mystery, bearing no organizer's name, only the chilling tagline, one final act to honor those who have been forgotten. The day arrives, and as Elisa makes her way to the theater, an unshakable dread settles over her. The closer she gets, the heavier the air feels, as if the building itself is exhaling its malice. The theater looms before her, a dark monolith against the twilight sky. The wrought iron gates creak open, as if anticipating her arrival. The cobblestone path leading to the entrance is littered with decayed leaves, each step echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. She notices small details that unsettle her: claw-like scratches on the gate, a faint red stain on the theater's ancient door, and a sign that reads, "Welcome, but beware what you become." Inside, the lobby is eerily pristine, as though untouched by time. The chandeliers hang low, their crystals gleaming in soft, flickering light. A heavy velvet curtain partially obscures the entrance to the main hall, but faint music, haunting and sorrowful, drifts through, calling her closer. As Elisa steps inside, she's greeted by a peculiar figure, a man dressed in an old-fashioned tuxedo with an expression so lifeless it could be mistaken for a wax statue. He hands her a mask, its design unnervingly personal. It feels warm, almost alive, and as her fingers graze its surface, she feels a slight vibration, as if it has a heartbeat. The mask is a work of art, yet its grotesque smile unsettles her. It seems to mock her fears. Wear it during the performance, the man says in a voice that's both soft and hollow, to see the truth. She notices other attendees, all silent, already seated in the shadowy theater. Each one wears a mask, their faces obscured, their identities swallowed by the anonymity of their grotesque coverings. Elisa feels an urge to leave, but is drawn forward by a force she cannot explain. The theater itself feels alive, pulsing with an invisible energy that resonates in her chest. As she takes her seat and places the mask over her face, her vision blurs for a moment. When it clears, the theater is no longer the same. The walls seem to close in slightly, and the air feels heavier, as if the room is watching her. Elisa glances around and freezes. The audience, once a collection of strangers, now appears distorted. Their masks seem to have fused with their faces, the eyeholes glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. A chill runs down her spine as she realizes that no one else seems to notice. Or perhaps they've already accepted their fate. The room darkens, and an almost imperceptible chill sweeps through the air. The stage, previously empty, bursts to life with an unsettling intensity. The curtains draw back, revealing a tableau of actors frozen mid-motion, their postures unnervingly stiff, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. They wear masks that echo the grotesque designs given to the audience, each one a masterpiece of disturbing intricacy. As the orchestra begins to play, the music crawls into Elisa's ears, sweet and melodic at first, but laced with dissonant notes that set her nerves on edge. It is as though the instruments themselves are weeping, their sorrow palpable and suffocating. Elisa's breath catches in her throat as the actors suddenly move, their gestures sharp and mechanical. Their bodies seem to fight against invisible strings pulling them forward, their movements eerily reminiscent of marionettes. A sense of dread begins to build in her chest as she notices something strange. The actors are not looking at each other or even at the audience. Their hollow gazes are fixed on her, as if she were the only one in the room. She grips the armrests of her seat, her fingers trembling. The atmosphere becomes heavier, pressing against her lungs, and her mask starts to feel tighter. It molds to her face like a second skin, the edges digging into her flesh. For a brief moment, she hears a whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, but it's enough to send a shiver down her spine. "Why did you come here?" The voice hisses, faint yet piercing, as though it came from within her mind. She glances around, but the other audience members remain eerily still, their heads tilted slightly, as if listening to something only they can hear. The performance shifts, the scene on stage transforming into something impossibly vivid. The actors are no longer constrained by the stage. They move down the aisles, their masks glowing faintly under the dim lights. Elisa's vision starts to blur, and she blinks rapidly, trying to focus. When her sight clears, the theater has changed. The once polished floor is now cracked and worn, as if decades of decay have taken place in seconds. The air smells damp, like rotting wood and mildew. Shadows dance along the walls, but there is no clear source of light. The audience, now fully masked, seems fused to their seats, their faces contorted into expressions of fear or bliss. It's impossible to tell which. The music crescendos, and the whispers grow louder, mingling with the melody in a discordant symphony. Elisa's pulse quickens as she feels something move behind her. Slowly, she turns her head, only to catch a fleeting glimpse of a shadow darting out of sight. She wants to scream, to run, but her body is frozen. It's as if the mask is controlling her now, her limbs heavy and unresponsive. The scene on stage shifts again, but this time it mirrors something disturbingly personal, a recreation of Elisa's childhood bedroom. The bed, the curtains, even the stuffed bear with one missing eye. It's all there, eerily exact. The audience watches in silence as an actress, wearing a mask identical to Elisa's, steps into the scene. The figure mimics her movements, tilting its head in the same way, pacing with the same nervous energy. Elisa's heart pounds in her chest. How could they know these details? How could they know her? Suddenly, the figure on stage turns to face her, pulling off its mask to reveal a hollow void where a face should be. Darkness spills from the void like smoke, reaching out toward Elisa. She tries to tear off her mask, but it won't budge. The whispers turn into laughter, low and menacing, filling the air around her. Her vision begins to warp, and the theater feels as though it's collapsing inward. The last thing she hears before the lights dim completely is a single chilling sentence, spoken in a voice that is unmistakably her own. "You belong to the theater now." As the lights flicker back to life, Elisa feels disoriented. The air in the theater is heavy, almost suffocating, and the once polished floor now appears cracked, with tendrils of mist crawling from the stage toward the audience. Her heart races as she looks around. The other attendees remain motionless, their masks seemingly fused to their faces, their expressions eerily blank. The orchestra plays on, but the melody has twisted into something sinister, low, droning notes that seem to vibrate through her bones. Every sound feels alive, pulsating with an unrelenting tension. On stage, the actors begin to move again, but this time their steps are irregular, their limbs jerking as if controlled by invisible strings. Their masks glimmer faintly in the dim light, reflecting faces that appear both familiar and alien. Elisa's stomach churns as she realizes that some of the faces resemble people she knows, her old drama teacher, a childhood friend, even her late mother. She blinks hard, convinced it's a trick of the light, but the faces persist, staring at her with hollow, glowing eyes. Suddenly, one of the actors steps off the stage and walks directly toward her. The figure moves unnaturally, as if its joints are bending in directions they shouldn't. Elisa grips the armrests of her seat, her breath shallow. The figure stops inches away, tilting its masked face down to meet hers. "Do you see now?" it whispers, the voice raspy and fragmented, like static on a broken radio. Before she can respond, the figure reaches out and places a cold, gloved hand on her shoulder. A jolt of icy pain shoots through her body, and she gasps, her vision momentarily blacking out. When her sight returns, the theater has transformed again. The ornate walls are now lined with decaying masks, their vacant eyes staring into the void. The audience is gone. Only rows of empty chairs remain, all facing a stage that has grown impossibly large, stretching into darkness. Elisa feels an overwhelming urge to run, but her legs refuse to move. The mask on her face grows tighter, as if it's burrowing into her skin. Her breaths come in short, panicked gasps, and a metallic taste fills her mouth. The actors on stage begin to chant, their voices blending into an otherworldly harmony that makes her head spin. Words she doesn't understand fill the air, but they resonate deep within her, tugging at something primal. The stage floor splits open, revealing a dark abyss. From the shadows emerges a massive figure, cloaked in swirling mist. It doesn't wear a mask like the others. Instead, its face is a featureless void that seems to consume the light around it. The chanting grows louder, more frantic, as the figure raises an arm and points directly at Elisa. The air crackles with electricity, and she feels a force pulling her toward the stage. Her chair slides forward against her will, dragging her closer to the abyss. Desperate, she claws at the mask, but it won't budge. "You don't belong here," she whispers to herself, tears streaming down her face. The moment the words leave her lips, the figure tilts its head, as if amused. "Oh, but you do," it replies, its voice echoing inside her mind. The chanting stops abruptly, leaving an eerie silence that is more terrifying than the noise. Suddenly, the stage lights burst into a blinding white, and the theater is filled with deafening applause. Elisa looks around, but there's no one clapping, only the masks on the walls, their hollow eyes gleaming with mockery. The sound becomes unbearable, reverberating through her skull, and she screams. The moment she does, the applause ceases, and the theater falls into complete darkness. For a brief, horrifying moment, she feels utterly alone, suspended in a void. Then, from the blackness, dozens of glowing eyes begin to appear, surrounding her. They belong to the masks, which now float freely, their grotesque shapes twisting and morphing as they draw closer. One mask hovers inches from her face, its voice soft but dripping with malice. The performance has only just begun. Elisa's scream echoes through the darkness as the masks close in, their laughter mingling with the faint hum of the orchestra tuning its instruments once more. Elisa's scream fades into silence as the darkness around her solidifies, pressing against her like an invisible cage. The air is thick and cold, carrying the metallic scent of blood and decay. A single spotlight pierces the void, illuminating the stage, which has transformed into something grotesque. The floor is no longer wood but a patchwork of faces, their expressions frozen in agony. Their mouths silently scream, and their hollow eyes seem to follow her every move. Elisa stumbles back, her heart pounding, but she cannot escape the pull of the spotlight. Suddenly, the masked actors reappear, stepping into the light with movements that are no longer human. Their limbs twist and contort in impossible ways, and their masks seem to pulse as though alive, their features shifting and writhing. They form a circle around Elisa, their heads cocked at unnatural angles as they begin to chant again. This time, the words are clear: she is the chosen one. She will complete the cycle. The phrase repeats, growing louder and more distorted until it feels like it's reverberating inside her skull. Elisa's mask tightens further, sending sharp pain through her temples. She claws at it, desperate to remove it, but her fingers sink into the material as though it's part of her skin. The mask feels warm now, pulsing like a heartbeat, and her vision begins to blur. Shadows creep at the edges of her sight, twisting into familiar shapes. Memories flood her mind, memories that aren't hers. She sees flashes of a young woman standing on this very stage decades ago, her face hidden behind a mask identical to Elisa's. The woman is surrounded by the same actors, chanting the same words, her fate sealed. The vision snaps away, and Elisa is back in the present. The actors step closer, their hands outstretched. Each finger is unnaturally long, tipped with sharp, blackened nails. One of them reaches for her mask, but instead of removing it, they press their palm against her forehead. A searing pain shoots through her, and she collapses to her knees, her screams echoing in the cavernous theater. The floor beneath her begins to shift, the faces twisting and writhing as though alive. The mouths open, releasing guttural wails that blend into a horrifying symphony. The spotlight dims, and the massive, featureless figure from before rises again from the abyss. It towers over Elisa, its presence overwhelming and suffocating. She tries to look away, but the mask forces her to stare directly into the void where its face should be. From the emptiness comes a voice, not a whisper, but a deep, resonant tone that shakes her to her core. "You sought the truth, and now it has claimed you. You are the last piece of this cursed tale. Take your place, or let the cycle consume you entirely." The figure extends its hand, impossibly large and clawed, beckoning her forward. Elisa trembles, every fiber of her being screaming to resist, but her body is no longer under her control. Her feet move on their own, dragging her toward the edge of the abyss. Just as she's about to step into the darkness, something shifts inside her. A faint memory surfaces, her drama teacher once telling her, "Theater is not just about playing a role, it's about breaking free from it." Clinging to those words, Elisa fights against the pull of the mask, her will surging with unexpected strength. She reaches into her pocket and feels the edges of the actor's journal she found earlier. In a moment of clarity, she remembers the strange incantation written on its final page, meant to sever the connection between the cursed masks and their victims. Her voice shakes as she begins to recite the words, each syllable cutting through the suffocating darkness like a blade. The actors falter, their movements jerking erratically as though they're being unraveled. The massive figure lets out a deafening roar, its form distorting and collapsing inward. The theater itself begins to crumble, the walls peeling away to reveal an endless void. Elisa's mask loosens slightly, but not enough to remove it. The void pulls at her, threatening to drag her in, but she continues chanting, her voice growing stronger. With a final, desperate cry, she finishes the incantation. The mask shatters, and a blinding light erupts from its remains, consuming everything in its path. The actors disintegrate, their masks falling lifeless to the ground. The figure collapses into itself, leaving only silence in its wake. Elisa collapses to the floor, gasping for air, her face finally free. As the light fades, she finds herself alone in the theater. It's quiet now, the air still and cold. The stage is empty, and the faces on the floor have vanished. She stumbles to her feet, her hands trembling as she looks around. The journal is gone, as is any trace of the performance. But something remains, a single mask, resting on the stage, its empty eyes staring back at her. It's identical to the one she wore, but now it's cracked, a faint whisper emanating from within. Elisa turns to leave, but as she reaches the exit, she hears a soft voice behind her. The performance never truly ends. She doesn't look back. Elisa stumbles out of the theater, her mind racing, her heart still pounding from the terror she had just experienced. She can still feel the coldness of the mask pressing against her face, as though it had left an imprint on her skin. The air outside is thick with the smell of damp earth, but it offers no comfort. She blinks against the harsh daylight, disoriented. For a moment, she thinks it was all a dream, a twisted nightmare that her mind had conjured in the darkest corners of her imagination. But deep down, she knows it wasn't. She clutches her chest, her breathing shallow, and begins walking aimlessly, trying to clear her mind. Her footsteps echo eerily on the empty streets. She's drawn back to the library, the place where she first uncovered the legend of the theater. Perhaps there's more to it, something she missed in her haste to attend the performance. She cannot shake the feeling that the answers lie hidden in the dusty corners of those forgotten pages. When Elisa arrives, the library is as still as the grave. The air smells of aged paper and mildew, and the rows of books seem to watch her, their spines crooked with the weight of forgotten knowledge. She makes her way to the section on local legends and the theater. The shelves seem to shift and groan under her hands, and the faint murmur of whispers seems to grow louder the deeper she searches. It's as if the very walls are trying to speak to her, but she ignores the sensation, focusing on the task at hand. Her fingers trace over the faded titles until she finds what she's looking for, an old, leather-bound journal. It's marked with a peculiar symbol, one that she recognizes from the theater's stage, a face half-masked and half-empty. The moment her hand touches the cover, she feels a jolt of energy, like an electric shock running through her fingertips. She hesitates but opens it anyway, the pages yellowed with age. The first entry is dated over a century ago, written in a neat, flowing hand. The author is someone named Emil Cartwright, an actor who had performed in the very first production at the Cassandra Theater. As Elisa reads, she begins to understand the true horrors that the theater had concealed all these years. Cartwright describes in chilling detail the origins of the theater, the pact made between the original performers and a mysterious entity that had promised them eternal fame in exchange for their souls. He writes of the masks of the forgotten, cursed objects designed to bind the wearer's soul to the theater's curse. These masks would allow the actors to live forever through the performance, but they would need fresh souls to sustain the cycle. As Elisa turns the page, her stomach churns. The next entry details an event that is far too familiar, the last performance. Cartwright writes that a group of actors, including himself, had once been trapped in a similar cycle, repeating the final show over and over again, never able to escape. The masks had taken hold of their minds, reshaping their memories and identities until they were no longer human but hollow vessels, puppets of the theater. He describes how one by one, the actors began to disappear, either claimed by the theater or lost to their madness, unable to distinguish reality from performance. Cartwright's final entry is a frantic plea for someone to stop the cycle, to destroy the masks before it's too late. But his final words are ominous. The theater lives. It will claim you. It will claim all of us, and the performance will never end. Elisa drops the journal, her hands trembling. She stares at the pages, her mind racing as the weight of the words sinks in. She realizes the truth with a sickening certainty. The theater hadn't been destroyed in the fire. It had merely been reborn, waiting for someone to take its place. She knows now that the cycle will continue unless she acts. But how? The mask she wore is gone, vanished without a trace, and yet she feels its presence, as if it's still watching her, waiting. Suddenly, the lights in the library flicker. Elisa looks around, her heart leaping into her throat. The faintest sound of footsteps echoes from the back of the room. She stands still, her breath caught in her chest. She knows she's alone. No one else is supposed to be here. The footsteps grow louder, and Elisa feels a chill crawl up her spine. Slowly, she turns toward the back of the library, her eyes scanning the shadows. For a moment, there's nothing, just the stillness of the dark aisles and the distant hum of the overhead lights. Then, from the corner of her eye, she sees it, a flash of movement. A figure, draped in a long cloak, stands in the shadows. The mask on the figure's face is the same one Elisa had worn. Her stomach drops, and she instinctively steps back. The figure tilts its head, its hollow eyes fixed on her, and slowly, it begins to approach. "You thought you were free," a voice whispers, raspy and distant, yet somehow intimately close. "But the performance never ends. You will return. We always return." Elisa backs away, her mind racing, but the figure continues its slow, deliberate approach, its footsteps silent but deafening. She spins toward the exit, but the door slams shut with a deafening bang. The windows are covered in a thick, black fog, and the library feels like a tomb, suffocating her from all sides. The walls seem to shift, as if the very building is alive, closing in on her. She can hear the whispers now. Thousands of voices, all speaking at once, their words unintelligible but filled with malice. The figure reaches out, its long fingers stretched toward her. Elisa can feel its presence now, its cold breath brushing her neck. "You are the next mask. The next act." In a blind panic, Elisa reaches for the door again, but it remains locked. She spins around, searching for another way out, but there is none. As the figure steps closer, she realizes with a chilling clarity, this is no longer just a nightmare. It's a reality she can't escape. The cycle has already begun again. The theater is calling her back, and this time, there will be no escape. Elisa bolts from the library as soon as the door unlocks, her breath ragged and her heart pounding like a drumbeat in her chest. The figure didn't follow her, but its presence lingers, heavy and oppressive. Outside, the world feels altered, quieter, darker, as though the town itself is holding its breath. She knows she can't escape the theater's influence. Every corner she turns seems to echo with faint whispers, and every shadow stretches unnaturally toward her. The curse has marked her, and she feels its grip tightening with each passing moment. Her desperation leads her to the only person who might have answers, Victor Almeida, a reclusive historian and local eccentric who has spent decades researching the supernatural phenomena surrounding the Cassandra Theater. Rumors swirl about his past. Some say he narrowly escaped one of the theater's cursed performances, while others claim he's mad, having lost his mind trying to unravel its mysteries. Elisa doesn't care if the stories are true. She needs help. Victor's house is a crumbling, isolated mansion at the edge of town, shrouded in mist and overgrown ivy. The windows are dark, the air around the property eerily still. Elisa hesitates at the door, feeling as though unseen eyes are watching her, but she forces herself to knock. The sound echoes unnaturally, as if the house is hollow. After a long pause, the door creaks open, revealing Victor, a gaunt, wiry man with piercing eyes that seem to look straight through her. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asks before Elisa can speak, his voice a mix of curiosity and dread. "The masks, they've chosen you." Elisa stammers, trying to explain what she's experienced, but Victor cuts her off, ushering her inside with urgency. His home is cluttered with books, photographs, and artifacts, all tied to the Cassandra Theater. On one wall, a map is pinned, marking every known performance of the cursed theater throughout its history. Red strings connect the locations, forming a tangled web that centers on the theater's current location. Victor sits her down, his expression grim. "The Cassandra Theater isn't just a place," he explains. "It's alive. It moves, it waits, and when it finds the right soul, it ensnares them in its performance. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But, he pauses, his gaze hardening. You might be the first to break the cycle. Elisa clutches the journal she brought from the library, handing it to Victor. As he flips through its pages, his face grows pale. This, he whispers, is the key. He explains that the theater's curse is rooted in the masks of the forgotten, powerful artifacts bound by the souls of those who wore them. Destroying the masks would weaken the theater's grip, but the process comes at a cost. The person attempting it must face the theater's heart, a place where reality warps and the boundary between life and death is razor thin. Victor retrieves an old, leather-bound tome from his shelf, filled with cryptic instructions and occult symbols. He traces his finger over a passage, and then looks at Elisa with a mix of pity and resolve. You'll need to return to the theater, he says. But you can't do it alone. Elisa feels a flicker of hope, but it's quickly extinguished when Victor warns her of the dangers. The theater will fight back, he says. It will twist your mind, dredge up your deepest fears, and use them against you. And if you falter, you'll become one of them. Despite her terror, Elisa agrees. Victor prepares her for the journey, giving her a small, ancient dagger etched with runes, a weapon designed to sever the bond between the masks and their victims. He also gives her a lantern filled with enchanted oil, explaining that it will light the way through the theater's darkness, but only for as long as her will remain strong. Before she leaves, Victor offers one final warning. When you enter the heart of the theater, you'll see things that aren't real, but that will feel as though they are. Whatever happens, remember who you are. The theater thrives on making you forget. As Elisa steps out into the cold night, the dagger and lantern in hand, she feels the weight of her mission pressing down on her. The theater looms in the distance, its silhouette barely visible through the mist. The whispers in her mind grow louder, more insistent, but she steels herself. Each step toward the theater feels like a descent into madness. The streets seem to elongate unnaturally, the lampposts flickering out as she passes them. Shadows dart in and out of her vision, and the wind carries faint, mocking laughter. By the time she reaches the gates, they're already open, as if the theater is welcoming her back. The building looms larger than before, its walls pulsating faintly like a living organism. The doors creak open on their own, revealing the lobby, now cloaked in total darkness. Elisa lights the lantern, its soft glow barely pushing back the oppressive shadows. The air is heavy with the scent of decay and old wood. As she steps inside, the door slams shut behind her, trapping her once again in the theater's malevolent embrace. The stage is empty, but the sound of faint applause echoes through the hall, followed by a chilling voice. Welcome back, Elisa. The final act is about to begin. Elisa steps onto the stage, her lantern flickering weakly against the suffocating darkness that seems to devour its light. The theater feels alive, its wooden floors creak like groaning bones, and the walls pulse faintly, as if they are breathing. The silence is deafening, broken only by the sound of her own footsteps. She clutches the dagger Victor gave her, its runes glowing faintly as though reacting to the malevolence in the air. Every instinct screams for her to turn back, but she presses on, knowing there's no escape unless she ends this nightmare. The spotlight snaps on without warning, blinding her momentarily. When her vision clears, the stage has transformed. It is no longer an empty space, but a grotesque mockery of reality. The faces she saw in the journal, the souls of those claimed by the masks, are now etched into the walls, their expressions frozen in agony. Their mouths move, forming silent screams, and their eyes follow her every movement. The air grows colder, each breath visible as a faint mist. From the shadows, the masked actors emerge, their movements jerky and inhuman. Their masks have changed. No longer inanimate objects, they now shift and twist, revealing glimpses of the faces trapped beneath. The actors encircle her, their hollow eyes glowing faintly as they chant in an ancient, guttural language. The sound vibrates through Elisa's chest, filling her with an overwhelming sense of dread. The lantern flickers again, its light dimming further. She tightens her grip on the dagger, her knuckles white. The chanting stops abruptly, plunging the theater into an oppressive silence. The floor beneath her begins to tremble, and the wooden boards crack, revealing an abyss of swirling darkness below. From this void, the massive, featureless figure she saw before begins to rise, its form cloaked in shadow and mist. Its presence is overwhelming, pressing against her mind like a weight she can barely bear. The figure looms over her, its void-like face pulling at the light, devouring it. "You returned," it says, its voice deep and resonant, echoing as though coming from every corner of the theater. "Did you think you could escape us?" Did you think you could destroy what has existed for centuries? Elisa's voice trembles, but she forces herself to respond. I came to end this. The masks, the cycle, it all stops here. The figure laughs, a low, bone-chilling sound that reverberates through the room. You cannot destroy what you do not understand. You are already part of the performance, Elisa. You always were. Before she can react, the figure raises a hand, and the masked actors move toward her, their movements synchronized like puppets controlled by invisible strings. Elisa swings the dagger wildly, its glowing runes burning brighter with each strike. The actors recoil, their masks cracking slightly under the blade's touch. Encouraged, she fights her way through them, her breathing ragged and her heart pounding. The figure watches, seemingly amused. Courageous but futile, it says, extending its hand toward her. The air around Elisa thickens, and she is lifted off her feet, suspended in the air by an unseen force. Her body convulses as visions flood her mind, visions of herself wearing the mask, performing on this cursed stage for eternity, her identity erased. You cannot resist the theater, the figure whispers. You belong to us. Summoning all her strength, Elisa remembers Victor's words. The theater thrives on making you forget who you are. She focuses on her memories, her love for acting, her determination to uncover the truth, and the people she's lost. The dagger in her hand pulses with light, and she uses it to slash at the force holding her. She falls to the ground, the impact jarring but freeing her from the figure's grip. The stage begins to shift again, the walls closing in, and the faces screaming silently. The masks on the actors start to crumble, revealing faces twisted in pain and despair. The figure grows larger, its form filling the stage as it roars in fury. You will not defy us. You will take your place. Elisa grips the dagger and steps forward, her voice steady despite the terror consuming her. I don't belong to you. This ends now. She drives the blade into the floor of the stage, where the cracks revealing the abyss are widest. The runes on the dagger blaze with light, and the theater begins to quake violently. The figure lets out an ear-piercing scream as the light from the dagger spreads, consuming the stage and tearing through the masks. The actors collapse one by one, their forms disintegrating into ash. The faces on the walls vanish, their expressions of agony replaced with peace. The figure thrashes, its form disintegrating, the void in its face collapsing inward. As the light engulfs the theater, Elisa feels herself being pulled into the abyss. She closes her eyes, clutching the lantern tightly, and whispers, I am Elisa Mora. I am not your puppet. The light explodes, and then there is nothing but silence. When Elisa opens her eyes, she is outside the theater. The building is gone, replaced by an empty lot overgrown with weeds. The dagger is still in her hand, its runes now faded, and the lantern lies beside her, extinguished. The whispers are gone, the air clear. But as she turns to leave, she notices something on the ground, a single mask, cracked and lifeless. For a moment, she considers destroying it, but something stops her. She picks it up and carries it with her, knowing the theater may be gone, but its darkness might still linger. The dawn breaks, but its light feels hollow, as though the sun has lost its warmth. Elisa walks away from the empty lot where the Cassandra Theater once stood, her feet dragging, her mind clouded with exhaustion and unease. The mask, cracked and lifeless, feels heavier in her hands than it should, as if it still holds some lingering fragment of the theater's darkness. Every instinct tells her to leave it behind, to bury it and walk away, but something inside her whispers that it isn't over, that it may never be over. She reaches her apartment, collapsing onto her couch, her breath shallow and uneven. For a moment, she allows herself to believe it's done. The theater is gone, the cycle broken, and the cursed masks destroyed. But as her eyes drift to the mask she brought with her, doubt creeps into her mind. Its empty eye holes seem to stare back at her, challenging her sense of relief. The cracks on its surface pulsate faintly, almost imperceptibly, like the slow heartbeat of something lying dormant. Elisa shakes her head, trying to dismiss the feeling. She decides to lock the mask away, sealing it in an old trunk she keeps in her closet. As the lid closes, she exhales deeply, thinking she's finally put the nightmare behind her. But as she turns away, the faintest sound reaches her ears, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails drumming on wood. She freezes, her blood running cold. The sound stops, and when she opens the trunk to check, the mask is exactly where she left it, motionless and silent. The days that follow are filled with an oppressive sense of unease. Elisa tries to return to her normal life, but the world feels different, off-kilter, as though reality itself has been subtly warped. Shadows seem to linger longer than they should, twisting into shapes that resemble masks. Whispers brush the edge of her hearing, unintelligible yet maddeningly persistent. She tells herself it's just her imagination, the aftereffects of trauma, but the feeling of being watched never leaves her. One night, unable to sleep, she decides to revisit the journal she retrieved from the library. As she flips through its pages, she notices something she hadn't before, a final entry written in shaky, desperate handwriting. It reads, "The theater is gone, but its echoes remain. Beware the mask. It is a seed, and where it rests, the theater will grow again." The words send a chill through her, and her gaze drifts back to the locked trunk. She rushes to it, her hands trembling as she turns the key. When she opens it, the mask is no longer cracked or lifeless. Its surface is smooth, pristine, and its eyeholes now glow faintly with an unnatural light. The air in the room grows colder, and a faint sound fills the space, the echo of distant applause. Panicking, Elisa grabs the mask and runs outside, desperate to rid herself of it. She races to the nearest bridge, intent on throwing it into the river below. But as she holds it over the edge, the mask seems to resist her, its surface growing hot to the touch. Whispers swirl around her, growing louder, forming words that pierce her mind. "You are one of us now. You cannot escape." Elisa screams, hurling the mask into the water with all her strength. It vanishes beneath the surface, the whispers silenced. She collapses onto the ground, shaking, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, she feels relief. But as she looks into the rippling water, her reflection stares back at her, wearing the mask. The image fades, and she sits there trembling, unsure if what she saw was real or another trick of her unraveling mind. She returns home, but the unease follows her. The next morning, she finds a letter slipped under her door, the paper old and yellowed. It's an invitation to a performance at the Cassandra Theater. The theater is gone, she tells herself. It was destroyed. But deep down, she knows the truth. The theater was never just a building. It's a force, an idea, and as long as the mask exists, it will find a way to return. The invitation's message is chillingly familiar. One final act to honor those who have been forgotten. The camera pans away from Elisa, sitting frozen with the letter in her hands, her expression a mix of terror and resignation. The faint sound of applause grows louder, and the screen fades to black with one final, haunting whisper. The performance never ends. The Cassandra Theater's curse remains shrouded in mystery. Is Elisa doomed to repeat the cycle, or can she find a way to destroy it for good? What would you do if you were in her place? Let us know your theories in the comments. And remember, every like and share helps us uncover more chilling tales like this one. Subscribe and join us next time on Labyrinth of the Mind. But be careful. Not every door leads back to reality.